hey, you really disrespected me. I'm not going to tolerate you talking to me that way. That to me is masculine. It's like assertive, kind of confident. Like, I'm not going to hide it and act like I'm fine. I'm going to address like what is happening. But if he was like, I'm going to kick your fucking ass if you ever come, and then he like gets really violent and like intimidating and he's like threatening to punch someone, that to me, I would be like, really? Like, we don't need to go there. Like, that's way too much. That to me is the difference. Hello, everybody. This is Sex Positivity Unfiltered, where we talk about sex and we are not polite about it. My name is Lindsay Murray.
And I'm Denise Stratton.
And for today, we are talking about toxic masculinity and what it is, what we do about it, how can we tell when it's happening. And this topic actually was requested by a listener of ours. And so we're super excited about that. We love getting listener topics and interest and what you guys want to hear. And we're all about it. So we took the time to do some research on this. Well, I want to hear from you, Denise. Like, how do you define toxic masculinity?
Oh, man. I didn't think I would have a lot to say about toxic masculinity when going into this. I thought this, a lot of times when I hear toxic masculinity now, I think of the Barbie movie. So I think of the Kens of the world and how the patriarchy changed, that scene. But yeah, no, after doing research, I have a lot to say about toxic masculinity. So, but yeah, guys, for those of you who are there, we will research your topic. So if you want to make me do a deep dive, I will do it for sure.
And we actually enjoy doing that. Like, I love doing the deep dive. Like, it is very self-reflective. But then I'm like, dang, I have a lot to say about this. Or maybe I have some personal experience regarding toxic masculinity. I do want to hear how you would define it, and then I'm sure I share a similar definition. But for anyone who is listening, this is definitely it's not an anti-masculine topic. Like, there's healthy masculinity, which we'll talk about, and then there's toxic masculinity. It's kind of with anything. I feel like anything can be toxic depending on the context and its impact on other people, and right? I mean, I feel like it could be that way, a lot of it. So, I don't want anyone listening to think like, oh, here we go again. The masculinity is bad talk. It's not. I mean, a lot of us are attracted to masculine qualities or have masculine qualities, but it's just like that toxic part that I think we wanted to address.
Yes. Because a lot of times when people hear the word toxic masculinity, a lot of times one ear will close, right? Just because they're just like, oh, that's just what the feminists and the men haters are saying. They're trying to take away our masculinity of our men and bring up these soft men, which is also a facet, but we'll get into it. But I understand.
Yes, absolutely. So I had to share that first. I was like, please listen. We have a lot of good things to say about this.
Yeah. No, masculinity is very much celebrated in this podcast. Just so we're aware. For those of you who are video, you see me. So, okay. Anyway, so the definition of toxic masculinity, according to Oxford, is a set of attitudes and behavior stereotypically associated with or expected of men that has a negative impact on men and society as a whole. So love that definition. Basically, it means that some people think that being manly means always being in charge, enjoying specific things and condemning other specific things, being really tough, never showing emotion. Like, those are the things that we see with masculine traits, or what men are expected to look like. But the idea that the guy has to be super tough and not show any feelings can be bad for their minds, and it also causes problems.
There's an author, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, that says, by far the worst thing we do to males by making them feel they have to be hard is that we leave them with a very fragile ego.
I like that.
I thought that kind of summed it up, because to me this goes back to like episode 1 where we talked about sex positivity and like the patriarchy and how these gender roles were formed. They're not like inherently biological. I feel like it's kind of like this with masculinity. Like, here's what boys and men do. And that's definitely like a social construct and not like men inherently just don't share their feelings. Like, that's not true, but I think a lot of them were taught not to, and it can end up leading to a lot of aggression, right? Because they're fragile. Their ego is fragile. So even what you were just saying right now, that's what I thought of is like, they're brought up that way.
No, I saw a lot of parallels to our first episode and just bringing up the patriarchy in general. I mean, in order for you to have toxic masculinity, I feel like you have to have a patriarchy of some sort, because we're taught that men are more important, and that because they're stronger, they're supposed to be the provider, the protector. Again, it's back to that box, right? That we are required to fit into, but you're not required to. I found a term, which I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it was a new term for me. It's called hegemonic masculinity.
I don't think I've ever heard of that. No.
Oh yeah, it's spelled interestingly. I had to look up how to. Yeah, okay. Hegemonic. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But basically, in the study of genders, there's this thing called hegemonic masculinity, and it was mentioned in R.W. Connell's gender order theory. But it's all about how there are many different ways to be a guy depending on the time, place, culture, and person. And this type of masculinity is like the big boss. So it's the idea that guys think that they should be in charge, and it gives them reasons for putting some guys and women down. Basically, it's a theory that tries to explain why guys often end up being seen as more important in societies than others, which I found fascinating.
Yeah.
Because, okay, small little tangent. Masculinity, and when people take our time and our culture in America in the 2020s, it's different than what it was 100 years ago. If you were to be a man today and you were to put on makeup and tights, that would be seen as a feminine quality. Mm-hmm. But if you were to do that 200-300 years ago, back when, you did wear the white wigs and men did wear makeup and they did put on tights and high heels and all of it. I mean, that was the fashion back then. And that was seen as masculine because you were a noble. So you made more money. You were financially able to afford these things. So yeah, you were seen as a man of the house.
Yeah. It's all about the context of the time, right? Like, it changes, and then whatever time period you're in is what tends to be like brought down to your children. Like, change takes a long time. Again, a long time, but at the same time, not a long time. Yeah, you know what I mean? But like for us as people who only live, like 100 years, let's say, change takes a long time. So you just bring down like what you knew down to your kids, and then it just goes on and on and on. So like the masculinity that we know, like I even think going back to our parents' age, toxic masculinity was probably even worse. Like in their generation. Like I feel like today we're getting more progressive by the day. Like toxic masculinity is still a problem, but I think like men as a whole are probably even a little bit more willing to share their feelings than like
I would agree with
my
that.
father or grandfather's generation. You know what I mean?
I would agree with that. And also your environment, right? So like people who are in more of a, diverse household have different than someone who's been in a, rural area and have only seen their generations, their grandpa and their dad. And that's really their only role models or whatever. So I feel like your environment has a lot to do with whether you do the toxic masculinity, if you're down that route or not.
Yeah. Well, I have like to go even a little bit further on the definition of toxic masculinity. So there's toxic masculinity, or you might see it's called traditional masculinity ideology, which is more of like a researcher's term.
Okay.
But researchers have really broken it down into 3 different parts of like what is toxic masculinity. And so part 1 is suppressing emotions or masking distress, like hiding it. The second one is maintaining an appearance of hardness. And the third is violence as an indicator of power. So kind of like that tough guy, like behavior.
Don't be tough.
Yeah. And the example I think of what like healthy masculinity is versus toxic masculinity, like let's say, I'll use my husband as an example just because like he's a guy. Okay. But like if someone disrespects him and he says, hey, you really disrespected me, I'm not going to tolerate you talking to me that way. That to me is masculine. It's like assertive, kind of confident, like I'm not going to hide it and act like I'm fine. I'm going to address like what is happening. But if he was like, I'm going to kick your fucking ass if you ever come, and then he like gets really violent and like intimidating and he's like threatening to punch someone, that to me, I would be like, really? Like, we don't need to go there. Like, that's way too much. That to me is the difference, right? Like, I'm giving that example because I don't want people to think that toxic masculinity means you're weak, because it doesn't mean that at all. You can still be assertive and honest and go after what you want, and it doesn't have to be in a way that's hurting anyone, right?
Oh yeah, no, as far as like traditional masculinity, and when I say traditional, I just mean really like of the time right now. There are a lot of things that I really did love. I do love about those traits. Again, this is, you're talking to someone who identifies as a masculine woman. So for sure there are things like, you know, a devotion to work, you know, we're for some reason working hard and hard labor and all of those things are more of a masculine trait. I'm not really sure why, but they are. Same thing with, you know, excellence in sports, providing for the family. Like, these are things that I feel are very good traits to teach the future generations, masculine or feminine. To be honest, to me, it doesn't matter. But those are good traits that are in the, this is the masculine, this is what we teach our boys, right, when they're growing up. Those, to me, those are good traits to teach anyone. But it's when, it seems like when it gets to those extremes.
Yes.
To where it gets very damaging, which is with everything, right?
Yeah. Well, and like the, like toxic masculinity and like using like violence as an indicator of power. I mean, it very much goes back to when we talked about domestic violence. Like if there's, I mean, particularly men, because they're the ones mostly being the abusers in these situations, like according to the data. If a man is abusing a woman or their partner or whoever that they live with, there's got to be some toxic masculinity mixed in there, I would think. I think those two are very related.
Dominant, you're supposed, apparently you're supposed to assert your dominance over people in general, you know, weaker men or women, regardless of what your environment is at the time. But yeah, that's, dominance is something that I kept seeing come up over and over and over while I was looking at this, which makes sense, which also could lead to a very destructive and violent future, but we'll get into that as well. Part of the question that we did get asked whenever our listener pulled up, they were like, they wanted us to cover toxic masculinity and how it could affect future generations, right? So I do have a couple slides. If I'm thinking about the results for that, how this impacts our future generations, our kids, how they're being raised, basically the things that I highlighted are the fact that, you know, because men aren't allowed to show emotions except anger, you're basically teaching kids that they can't express negative emotions properly, right? So with that being said, they end up developing this fear of being vulnerable, like you said before, which can also hinder their relationships in the future. And that's where you get, you know, we have these men who don't understand why they can't keep a relationship, right? Or why women won't, you know, come to their corner. So I saw that. And then also a big result of you not being able to show any other emotion other than anger is, I mean, this can cause bullying. This can cause domestic violence, which can cause prison time. It also, which I didn't even associate with it, but now that I think about it, it makes sense, is risky behavior. Yeah. If you're not allowed to show fear, if you're not allowed to show, you know, a lot of these maybe well, actually no, fear is pretty much that emotion.
you're not going to have any impulse control.
No.
Yeah.
No, and so when you see, I'm sorry guys, when you see the America's Most Funniest Videos and all those daring stunts and everything, my mom used to point out all the time, do you see what gender? Do you see the gender? And it was mostly men. And yeah, because men we're again, Jackass, the show Jackass, all men. We're just, they're supposed to take on these risky behaviors and be okay with getting hurt, and they just walk it off, right? So yeah, this is what we're teaching. Yeah. And then another facet of what this can cause our future generations is basically it encourages gender norms. So, which it just by default, encouraging gender norms encourages homophobia. It also encourages anti-feminism, right?
Well, and also like men cheat
Oh yes.
Yeah. Well, men do just cheat. I mean, don't they all like have that in them? Like you'll hear that, and I'm like, no.
Why are we accepting these things and not figuring out how to try to change
I mean,
them?
it's like the Scarlet Letter, right? Like she has the A because she's an adulterer. Men would never have to walk around with the letter A on their chest. Like, no. So that's even like another perfect example. Like, well, men are just, it's inherent within us. No, it's not.
No.
It's not. These gender norms are not inherent. They're not biological. They're a social construct that benefit those in power. It goes back to episode 1 that we had, right? The patriarchy. It benefits a lot of people and it maybe benefits them too, but it really does like way more harm.
Going back to biology, it's just a small tangent. We don't have to leave this in if you don't want to. But yeah, going back to biology, I have heard someone make the argument of men are biologically chosen to be promiscuous because they have to spread their seed to as many places as possible, right? Whereas women, we're supposed to be choosy because we only have one egg. Right?
Well, and it's like, it's such a bullshit argument because all the men I've ever met who like to have a lot of sex and a lot of partners, I've never heard them say, oh, I can't wait to have 30 kids. Like, they're not spreading their seed. They're just getting fucked, you know? Like, that's how I
guess unless your name is Elon. But yeah.
Right. They just want to have sex, which is fine. But I hate that argument of like, men are just more promiscuous because they're just drawn to, I'm like, no, they're not. To me, this is like a big lack of accountability. Like, even with the cheating thing, like, men just inherently have it in them to like, be with more partners. And I'm like, okay, if that were true though, why would more people not be like in open relationships or in polyamorous relationships? You know what I mean? Like if that was like inherent within you, you could make it work in an ethical way, but we're not talking about ethic. We're talking about being unethical. Like it's honestly, when you boil it down, it's like, well, men are unethical. It's just in them. Right? And I'm like, ew, why are we accepting that? Yeah, that's my take on it.
I liked that a lot. That's a really good way to substitute some words in there. But yeah, so, I mean, and this goes back to not even just teaching, little boys. We're also teaching little girls that, just inherently they're weaker, they're less important than men. And also, when I hear that men are supposed to go out and, just try to get as many women as possible, you're also kind of giving women more power than you realize, right? Mm-hmm. So, unfortunately, the toxic masculinity cycle, I feel, has, created the term incel. You know what incel is, right? Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
So, for anyone who's at home who doesn't know what the creation of incels are, it's basically an abbreviated term for involuntary celibacy, which I had never heard before. I just knew them as toxic masculine men. But apparently, when men become violent, the victims are overwhelmingly female. Frequently, incels display both misogyny and a stunning lack of self-awareness by blaming all of their romantic woes on women instead of taking a moment to understand why women might not want to associate with them. Toxic masculinity just in general just breeds incels.
100%. I think we've all had that friend or acquaintance or family member that speaks in a very derogatory way against women, and then on the same note will be like, I cannot, why can't, what's going on with all these women that, I can't be in a relationship. And it's like, because you don't respect them.
Thank you.
I mean, yeah, but they never look at it as like, maybe I'm the problem. They're just like, I should be able to get what I want when I want it. It goes back to impulse control. I should be able to get what I want when I want it. What's wrong with these bitches that won't give me the time of day? Like, fuck them. And I'm like, because you don't respect them.
You're right.
It's very interesting. That is, to me, the definition of incel.
And that brings me to my next unfortunate result, if we continue with toxic masculinity, is basically it promotes rape culture.
Yes.
Just out there. And I understand that a lot of the platforms that we're going to be putting this podcast on don't like that word, but I'm going to say it anyway because I don't like the fact that they're censoring it. I think we
need to be saying it.
Yes, yeah. I agree. But yeah, it promotes rape culture, basically saying that men are just one-dimensional. They're limited to just chasing sex, and that sex is a crucial component of their manlyhood, right? So it makes them feel entitled to it, entitled to sex. And the only reason to provide or to stay in shape or to even be tough is so that you can be attractive to, the female population, right? And so you can get sex, right? And it also inherently teaches men that women are property, that women are to be owned by men, and women's role is very subservient. And this does increase rape and sexual assault for the future generations.
Because the issue that happens, you said something that made me think of this. Like a man might really get in shape with the expectation of, I'm going to become really attractive, I'm going to get more women. When that doesn't happen, they become very angry. There's like no tolerance of like not getting what you want. That's really kind of at the core. There's this lack of tolerance of like, I deserve to get what I want whenever I want it. I've put in all this work to look good and go to the gym and blah, and I make all this money. If a girl doesn't want me, I am going to get angry because what the fuck is wrong with them? And then the anger leads to like these violations.
Yeah.
And it could lead to rape. It could lead to physical violence. That's what it is. Now that we're talking about it, honestly, I do a lot of that work with my couples that I work with, because I'm always like, anytime any partner is doing something like, hey, I want to make this change, I want to get in shape. Okay, what's your motivation to get in shape? Well, because I want to get more women. And I'm like, but there's no guarantee you're ever going to get that. You could be in the best shape of your life. The woman at the bar you think is attractive might not give you the time of day. Then what?
Yeah.
Like, what is your inherent motivation to get in shape? What is in it for you, just for you? And when someone can't really look outside of that, it's a sign to me that like, you're going to have a tough time being able to tolerate like not getting what you want.
Oh man, that really broke it down. That broke it down really well, because like we said before, there's a lot of aspects of masculinity that are really good. Ambition is awesome. Being in shape is awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, these are things that you should want to do. You should want to provide for your family. You should want to regulate your emotions, not completely dismiss them, but regulate them, right?
Yeah.
So these are things that we do find attractive, and they should be taught to our future generations. But those are things that you should want for yourself.
Yes.
They shouldn't be something that you're trying to, I guess, fake so that you can get the other gender, right?
Well, and I see that issue a lot in marriages, especially regarding sex. I will hear on a very regular basis, I've been nice to the kids, I've been doing the dishes, I've been taking care of the pets. Why are we not having sex? And it's like, if you're doing those things only because you think you're going to get something in return, that's going to feel really icky to your partner.
Yeah.
As opposed to like, I want to do these things because it makes me feel better as a spouse. It makes me feel more proud of our home. It makes me feel really good when I get to see you be a little bit stress-free because I have more capacity to take this on. Those things are good motivators to me. If the motivation is, well, I'll clean more because you'll fuck me more. And I'm like, you're going to be really disappointed because that's probably not how it's going to go. So, it's just something that partners really need to think about. Anytime you're doing something, why are you doing that? Are you doing it to get what you want from women? And then if you don't get it, you're going to get mad? That's almost like the core of violence to me.
And I feel it goes both ways, masculine and feminine, because you hear all the time, no, you shouldn't be going to the gym for him. You shouldn't be putting on that makeup for him. You shouldn't, these are things that you should be doing for yourself, right? To make you feel confident, to make you feel good, to make you comfortable in your body or whatever it is. So yeah. Wow. That was a good breakdown. Ooh, okay. But yeah, basically going back to it promotes rape culture. This was something I didn't realize, but a lot of rape offenders are young men. And it's because it's common for them to think that the only way for them to have social status is, or social status among their male peers, is to be highly sexually experienced.
Yes.
Right. And that's something that you brought up with the easy A. You know,
Yes.
she goes around with the A, and if she was a man, it wouldn't. No, he would have been a stud. You know, men would have looked up to him if he had had that many conquests. And on the opposite spectrum of that, if you're not sexually active as a man, you're often stigmatized.
Totally.
Right? So there, in the media, and then also in some cultures, because there's a lot of cultures out there and communities that promote this macho, this man, this toxic masculinity, and also the fact that they suggest that men should assert dominance over women. That's just how it goes. So yeah, this is how it's affecting our kids. It's going to affect us in the future.
Yeah.
And I don't like that society, guys. I think it would be better if we took these masculine traits and made them more positive and made them, like you said, for them to do it for themselves, because a lot of those traits are good traits.
Yeah. I think if what it really comes down to is it's kind of like breaking that generational cycle of abuse. If you're the one breaking that cycle, one of the therapists I've trained, I've mentioned him before. His name is Terry Real. But he says that if you're someone that has broken that cycle, like for yourself, for your marriage, and for your kids, like you come from this, let's say, toxic masculine world, and you do the really hard work to break that cycle, and your kids get a different experience, that is like the definition of a hero.
Hey,
because you're not just, it's not just for today. You're talking like generation after generation after generation after generation that you're saving from that. Because if you raise your kids in a healthy masculine way and in a non-patriarchal way, they're going to be more likely to raise their kids that way, and their kids are going to be more likely to raise their kids that way. Like, you're giving it a huge chance. So that is kind of like a hero to me.
I agree.
So if you're listening and you're breaking that cycle, like you're doing that work, like, you're a hero. Hey, it's a huge deal.
That is a huge deal. That was awesome. So I have just a real tangent, not research question.
Sure.
Do you have brothers?
I do have a brother.
You have a brother. Older, younger?
He's younger. He's 2 years younger than me.
Okay, so you got to see him grow up. Do you have any memories that you deem as like him being taught like toxic masculinity traits? Do you remember? Like,
yeah, 100%. I mean, the only emotion our father ever showed was anger. There's no like talking. It was just this really weird thing of like, emotions are burdensome, but like he got to be angry all the time. You know what I mean? Yeah. So now that I'm an adult and I look back and I'm like, talk about being emotional. Like, you're a very emotional man, and it just comes out as like anger and aggression. And that's definitely what my brother learned. And he, for a while, he turned to drugs and alcohol, and he would get in a lot of physical fights. He's been in probably several physical fights. With even people he might consider to be friends now. But there's just this mix of like, the only way for me to assert my dominance is to be violent and to like threaten to beat you up if you don't respect me. It's almost like this demand of respect, right?
Yeah.
Versus like being respectful and then getting it in return. Like the demand of respect, I think, is another thing. Because my dad was like that. He would get to be, I'm going to say violent. He never like physically hit us, but like anger to me feels like violence when you're always surrounded in anger. So he would get to be that way, but then it was like, but you better fucking respect me. And I would just be thinking like, but gosh, you don't really respect me.
Yeah. No, I could see that. Because when me growing up, I mean, that same thing. My father never showed any emotion ever. I think, now that I'm thinking about it, I have seen that man put more holes in the wall than I have seen him cry. Now that I'm thinking about it. Yeah.
And isn't that weird? It's weird.
Yeah. But that's because men, they're not allowed, right? They're not allowed to show emotion. They're not allowed to be sad. They're not allowed to be overly happy. They're not allowed to, any emotion other than anger. That's the only one that is acceptable.
Yeah. And because, again, it's like a power thing. It's acceptable for men to be angry, so they're going to want to do the thing that's acceptable. Is kind of where we all probably fit into.
And in turn, they teach their sons these things. I remember my and I don't know anybody out there, if you do feel like this was your family, please comment below. But in my family and in my peers' families, I would constantly see that the fathers were a little bit harder on the men than they were on their daughters, right? Because he's got to be tough, right? I remember as a baby, my dad brought my newborn brother into the shower with him, like to show, like not like the baby bath where no, he brought him into the shower, pouring down, and my mom was pissed about it. It was one of their big fights.
I bet.
And it was because he was like, no, he's gonna grow up and he's gonna learn how to tough it out and all these things.
That's the thing, is like it's that saying when there's a literal baby and they're crying in the night and, mom goes to get them, you're babying them. And I'm like, they're a baby. Yep. Like, they should be babied right now. That's the whole point, is that we're supposed to baby them at this time in their life. We don't need to create this, like, tough baby.
Yeah.
That's so weird. Oh. It's very odd, but that's what it is. And it really does. It does a lot of harm to boys and men, but then also, like, to women too.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, there's a few, like, statistics I want to share real quick, like, going into this. So the American Psychological Association, or the APA, so if you ever hear me say, like, APA guidelines or the APA says this, I'm referring to this, right? And they create a lot of guidelines for psychologists. I'm not a psychologist, but I am a therapist, so I feel like there's a lot of similarity to, like, if there's, like, APA guidelines, they're the same ones that I would follow, essentially, okay? As far as, like, working with clients. But they have a guideline that's called Guideline for Psychological Practice with Boys and Men. And these guidelines are basically for psychologists or clinicians of how to do their practice with boys and men, and, like, guidelines to keep in mind as you're working with them. And part of that is remembering a lot of them do come from a culture of, like, toxic masculinity. So you have to look at it through, like, socially and culturally and economically, and there's things you have to look at. What's interesting is those guidelines only came out, like, 4 years ago.
Wow.
2019. I guess it's been almost 5 years. 2019. So, like, even from the mental health standpoint, there's not been clear guidelines of, like, how to help men and boys until 2019.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I feel like we have more research on, like, men's orgasms than we do on that. Wow.
Well, we don't have a lot. It's the weird thing is, like, modern psychology, I guess is what I would call it, historically has always been about white men. It's always through that lens. But it's never really been through, like, a gender-based lens. Like, when we talk about women, we look at, like, what do women go through in society? And what is the stress of, like, motherhood? And what's the stress at home? What does that do for their mental health? Like, we look at this lens of women, if we're even studying women, which we are now, but historically not so much. I think when the research has been about white men, it's really been through this lens of, like, well, this is how men are. And not so much, well, wait a second, maybe we should challenge that gender bias a little bit and see, like, what's really going on. So that hasn't really been done until very recently.
Okay.
So even, I'm just pointing that out, like, when we're talking about giving support to men and boys, even these guidelines are very, very new, right? Okay. But it's like traditional masculinity or toxic masculinity. I'm using those interchangeably. That type of masculinity, like the very aggressive, powerful type, it has led to a lot of success for men. Right? Like, I think, like, 90% of CEOs are men, right? Like, as an example.
That sounds right.
So it's led to some very powerful positions, but it's also placed them in a position of violence, homicide, suicide. And I'm going to give you some numbers to this. So 90% of homicides in the U.S. are done by men. Cool. And 77% of homicide victims are men. And men are 3.5 times more likely than women to die by suicide, even though they are much less likely to report being depressed. Isn't that interesting?
Wow.
Yeah. And their life expectancy is 5 years shorter than women's.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's the suicide and depression thing I found very interesting. Because, again, they're not going to admit that they're depressed.
Mm-hmm.
but they are, and they hide it, and they're almost 4 times more likely to kill themselves than women are.
Crazy.
So it's really terrifying. Like, when we're talking about this isn't us being anti-man. It's really being, like, pro-men.
Yes.
Like, if we can get men to a place of healthy masculinity, there can be a lot of reduction to depression, to anxiety, to suicidality, to lots of stuff, you know? Like, their life could be better. Their life could be longer. And it could be more fulfilling.
Fulfilling.
If they, you know, if they could really challenge, right?
Get out of your box, guys. Get out of your box. The box is damaging.
Well, and one more thing. I have, like, another weird statistic, but it makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious, like, what you think about this. But I had found this study from 2011 by Dr. Kristen Springer, who's at Rutgers University. The study that she did, she found that men with the strongest beliefs about masculinity, and when I say strong beliefs about masculinity, I mean, like, not sharing emotions, being aggressive, being violent, making sure that I'm always in a position of power, right? Men that had the strongest beliefs about that were half as likely than men who have, like, more moderate masculinity beliefs. They're half as likely to get preventative health care. Isn't that interesting?
It is interesting.
And they're also, like, strong masculine features are linked to heavy drinking, the use of tobacco, and avoiding vegetables.
Oh, man, like, you are describing someone I know, really. Like, I'm literally from head to toe. It's interesting.
Yes, like, it's kind of like, I'm sure we've all heard those very, like, cheesy jokes, like, men eat steak and potatoes. I mean, like, it's kind of like that. It's like the manly man is like, I'm not a pussy. I'm not eating that celery. You know what I mean? Like, that's what kind of came off to me when I saw this study. But apparently there's some truth. Like, it's linked. The stronger that masculine belief, the less likely you are to go and get preventative health care, or even go to the doctor if you are feeling sick or there's something wrong.
Yeah, it's. I can see that now that I'm really thinking on it. Like, you are, the more traditional masculine you seem, the more, steak and eggs, steak and potato, very high protein diet. Also, you've always seen, like, veganism as, like, more of a feminine type trait, or any type of, you know, just yeah.
Well, and, like, it's like men who are vegans or men who are nurses get called, I mean, they get called names.
Yeah.
Like, they get called insulting names.
Let's go ahead and say some of the common sayings that you hear with toxic masculinity, which would be, don't be a sissy, or don't be a pussy. All the time.
Or you're, and I'm not, what I'm going to say is a derogatory term. This is not me saying it, and I would never call someone this because it's not okay. But, like, the term faggot, hear that. If there's any feminine, quote unquote, what a masculine person, a toxic masculine person would view as, like, too feminine, the word faggot gets thrown around a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm just like, that is so bothersome to me, because I'm like, why is that? Like, why are we using that word? But why is that such a problem? Like, why can't a man be vegan? Why can't he be a nurse? Why can't he cry in front of you?
Yep. Yeah. Well, no, because if, you know, big boys don't cry, right? Or, I mean, that's how you're not supposed to be feminine in any way. Like, and we teach them at a young age, you know, don't throw like a girl, don't cry like a girl. You're acting, you know, I mean, man up, don't be a little bitch. You know, you hear these sayings all the time. And to be honest, if we were being transparent, I've said these sayings to men before, or to my quote unquote butch lesbians, right? Because, you know, you have that masculinity that you're supposed to have. You're in this little box, and if you don't fit that box, if you go towards the feminine, then it's deemed as weaker, which is interesting.
And I know I've made comments like that too before in the past. Totally, because that's what you do. That's what you call people. Yeah, that's what you do. That's what, like, I've even been guilty of that. And then, you know, I look back and it's a little bit embarrassing.
Oh, yeah.
It's totally embarrassing to be like, gosh, I can't believe I used to say things like that.
Lindsay, this podcast and you have made me feel very embarrassed about my past. I'd go back to, like, me just, you know, the way I would talk to a lot of my friends, or, you know, tell people that I'm going to take their butch card away, you know, if they didn't know how to change oil or, you know, whatever it was. It's just, and now that I'm thinking about it, I'm doing a lot of self-reflecting. I'm just like, oh, it's probably not something that I should be telling people that they should do, right? Like, it's not something you shouldn't be in a box. I'm going to say that more than once today.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. That's what this is all about. Like, and I have like a few things to say just about like how to kind of change this or shift this, or if you are someone that is in this toxic masculine box, like what do you even do about that? The really hard part when I go over that is that someone has to want to.
True. Yeah.
That's the really hard part. I can even tell you with my practice, I think a lot of men come in with those traits, and again, I don't blame them because that's what they know. But if they're even a little bit open, a little bit willing to like look at themselves, right? There can be a lot of really beautiful change there. So, and I've seen that happen a lot. But I've also had those few cases where it hasn't been possible. Because if I point out like what toxic masculinity is and how that can lead to abuse and how maybe their behaviors are abusive in the relationship and like, are they willing to change it? Sometimes I'll get resistance like, I'm not changing a fucking thing because I don't think what I'm doing is wrong. Even though I can see how much it's hurting their partner, but I can also see how much pain they're in. I'm like, I can see that you're not okay either. Nope, I'm fine. And I will not be talking about, like I've gotten resistance like that. And at that point, there's not a lot that I can do.
It's interesting to me because they come to you for help. So you would assume.
Well, whenever it's an individual male, I don't know if I've ever had pushback like that. Because I think if it's an individual male, like, hey, I need help. And I've recognized like I'm not okay. That's the open door. Usually but with couples, they come in because they want their wife to change.
Of course.
Yeah. They'll come to therapy, but it's like, well, I need my wife to blah, blah, blah. And until we get that, then I'm not going to, So like they come in with this idea of like, I'm not doing a thing, but she needs to, right?
I'm about to say, I'm fine. You need to figure out how to fix her.
And then when I point out, I'm like, yeah, it's not really how this is going to work.
Interesting. Okay.
Then they're like, their hands are up. And I'm saying men, but, I've had a few female clients be that way too.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Before you go into how we change it, I do want to kind of give like more of the signs, right?
Of course.
So if you're, so just for the bullet points that you spoke on as basically the socially destructive traits that toxic masculinity has is it tends to include like misogyny, homophobia, violent domination, and we're like we said before, we're not saying that masculinity is bad. We're just saying that it's termed toxic masculinity because of their association with violence and sexual assault.
Well, and the like you mentioned homophobia. I'm going to be very bold when I say this because this is how I view it. If a man is homophobic, I can pretty much 100% guarantee they are also toxically masculine because they're homophobic because they're so afraid to be gay.
Of course, yeah.
They're like, that's not the manly way to do. It's like, even just saying that, I'm like, I already know. I already know. I can pretty much assume that.
I can see those being synonymous. Yeah,
they kind of are to me, right? So if I meet someone that's homophobic, I'm like, I know what that means.
Okay. Okay, yeah, and then going back, normalize violence. So, whenever you're saying, like, boys will be boys in the context of, like, bullying and aggression, which I've heard and I've seen even today, these days and age, when I'm thinking of, like, my my younger, like, nephews and cousins and things like that, if they hit, they're boys. Boys beat up on each other. That's just how it goes. I've seen that very many times. And also it has a psychological impact. So self-reliance and emotional repression in men are linked to, like you said, psychological problems correlated to depression, heightened stress, substance disorders. And one area that you see it all the time is like in prisons, apparently, like that hidden code. There's a hidden code of masculinity that you're supposed to follow in prisons. And if you don't, I mean, it can be very dangerous.
You're in danger, yeah. And men are in prison at a much higher rate for violent crimes than women are.
I could see that all day.
At a much higher rate. I think we need to be looking at those numbers because, like, in the U.S., I think the amount of, like, women in the U.S. versus men in the U.S. is, like, pretty equal. I'm sure there's, like, a % off here, but it's not like our society is 70% men. It's pretty much, like, half and half. So then if you're looking at it from that view, and then men are at such a higher rate in prison for violent crimes, it's just clear as day, like, men literally are more violent.
No, even Ashley Ward a couple episodes back had mentioned that, how the differences between the men inmates and the women inmates is usually the women inmates, it seemed like more like they were off some type of, they were off their medication of some sort, or, something else happened, whereas the men, usually it's a violent crime that is what she sees, which is crazy to me. And again, toxic masculinity, guys. So here's some signs. If you're at home or someone and they're exhibiting these traits, just be aware that this might be why. So basically the extreme self-reliance, right? So they need to do everything on their own, which I can kind of relate to in a way, because I've always tried to be a very independent person. But that was going back, like, last episode, I think we talked about how I had an ex take me aside and be like, well, you don't let anyone do anything for you. Yeah. And that's not a healthy thing. And just like you said, because of that extreme self-reliance, it makes them less likely to seek treatment or even help financially, right? Because you want to be able to provide it on your own. You want to be able to, no, I'm fine. I don't need, there will be no infection in my cut. I'll just rub some dirt on it, right? And I'll be fine, right? Walk it off.
Yeah.
Oh man.
It's like shameful to need help, so they're never going to let anyone in to help
Exactly.
them. Yeah.
God, my father is just coming out in this episode. Like, I'm hearing his voice out my mouth. All right. But yeah, they don't show emotions. So if this person isn't exhibiting any emotion other than anger, then we're in the toxic masculinity spectrum. Also, if they have extreme aspiration for physical, sexual, or intellectual dominance. So basically, if you exuberate, if you show violence over men or women in order to gain power. So yes. Also, just so we're aware, just a tangent that kind of encourages rape culture, just so we're aware. But
totally does.
With that being said, it goes into my next point, which is they devalue women, which I think is what makes me most angry when I see toxic masculinity online. I'm thinking a couple of YouTubers, how they view men as only wanting sex from women and nothing else. Yeah. So if you know a guy who says, like, I would never have female friends, like, I don't see the point, or that women's opinions don't matter, or maybe it's just, I've heard also from a podcast that I really dislike is women's only value is their body. Right.
It's such an objectification of women. Man. Well, and it's like when there's been lots of videos about this, like, in the past that I've seen. But it's like, if you, like, as a woman, if you have a friend who's a male, they definitely want to fuck you. They're just not telling you. Yeah. Like, there's that whole thing. That is not true. I have plenty of male friends where there is no sexual feelings. There's no romantic feelings. We're just friends because they're capable of they can view women as a support system and a friendship, and they can be emotionally vulnerable and still know we're not together, and also Lindsay is married. You know what I mean? Like, I don't believe that myth of, like, any guy you're friends with, they secretly want to be with you. They want to have sex with you. I don't believe that, because I feel like that is such a toxic masculine view of how men view women. Maybe that's true for some guys. Yeah, maybe. If all they're doing is objectifying every woman in their life. But I don't think that's always true.
No, I could honestly, as someone who has never been attracted to men, I have had people who were my friends, and then later on I realized, okay, we're not real. We are friends, but you just kind of want to hit it, so that's why you stick around. But then I've also had, I guarantee you, out of my really close friend sphere, if I were to come on to them, like if I were to just give them a completely 100% open door to get with this. Wow, that sounded really awkward. But if I were to give them that open door, I could see a decent amount of them rejecting me. And not because they're
well, not because they're like repulsed by you, but
exactly.
it's just like
that's
we're
not what
friends.
we have.
Like our intimacy is friendship.
Thank you. Yes,
that's how ours is. Like we have an intimate friendship, but there's no romantic feelings. There's no sexual feelings, and I feel like men and women can have that too.
I agree.
That toxic masculine view is like so. I don't know, the objectification of women. You know, you'll hear that too. Like I've heard men be like, I don't hate women, I love women. But what they really mean is like, I love to fuck women. And
that's
like,
what they mean.
That's not the same thing as loving and respecting women. But that is a very manly way to look at women. You know what I mean?
According to like a lot of the professors, when I'm thinking of professors of manliness and masculinity, I'm thinking of like the Andrew Tates and the Fit and Freshes of the world, where they're basically saying that there's no way in hell that a man has, just like you said, a man has a friendship with a woman if he's not gonna hit it.
Well, in the way that you can really figure out if a guy like is toxically masculine, you have to look at the women that they are respecting, and I'm going to put respecting in like air quotes, okay? Because if there's like a woman in the room who they think is really hot, they'll be nice to them all night. They'll go and get them a drink. They'll carry their bag. They'll do these things that like look like respect. But if there's a woman that they don't find attractive and they treat them like shit, I'm like, you don't respect women. Yeah. You only quote unquote respect the hot woman that like you want to get with. You know what I mean? Like some men are like that and you can see it.
Oh yeah.
You can totally see it. And I'm like, that's a man that does not respect women.
That's interesting. Cause I've had friends who will treat me just normal, but as soon as, you know, a nice pretty thing comes through the door, you know, they're a completely different person. So like they treat me like a friend, but as soon as okay, interesting. Okay.
And I think to a degree that can be like if a woman is a friend, like cool, like if they're not being disrespectful, they're your friend, cool, but they see someone they're attracted to, maybe they kind of like step it up a bit. I think that can be okay because I get that to a point, right? Like you're trying to catch someone's attention. I'm really talking about like totally disregarding and being rude to the woman in the room that you're not attracted to, but going out of your way to like do everything for this woman that like you really just want to have sex with.
Okay, so basically if this same guy took two strangers that he had no idea and one was in his eyes attractive and one wasn't, like he would treat them completely differently.
Yes.
Is what you're saying. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yep. I could see that. Okay. So yeah, signs of toxic masculinity. And to continue on to is also condemning anything feminine within another man or even in themselves, right? So you have a lot of guys like I don't like when she spanks me. I don't want, you know, her to think I'm gay or whatever it is. I don't like when she touched my butt or, you know, whatever.
I used to have this partner back in the day. He wasn't like a boyfriend, but he was a sexual partner. And he really liked his nipples played with. Like his nipples were very sensitive and he liked that. But he like was like, don't ever tell anyone that because like I would never want anyone to know that about me because it was like a very like as a guy, like guys don't like their nipples played with. That's such a, you know, and it's like, well, they do quite a bit actually. But I thought that was funny. Yeah.
Interesting. Yes. Okay. But yeah. So they also dislike women who show manly traits and engage in behavior that should be something of a man's role. And I've seen this when I was dating men in high school. I do remember that one of my boyfriends at the time absolutely hated when I cursed. Like absolutely. And I have a sailor's mouth. I am constantly, there's cuss words coming out of my mouth all the time. And it was just very unattractive to him. He's like, no, women don't do that. Or, you know, just, I've also had friends who didn't like smart women because that's just not something that, you know, needs to be, that's not their role, right? So yeah, again, toxic guys. And then the last sign I have is basically they equate affection for another man as being sexually attracted to other men. So just like you said before, like it's you can't show any like you can't say a guy is attractive. You're not supposed to really you're never supposed to kiss a man, even if it's on the cheek whatsoever. Like there's just these things that if you have any affection towards a guy, and I'm sorry, there's bromances. Men love men. Like men have really good, very close best friend relationships with other men. That's just normal. Yeah. But if those two people are a little too handsy, then it becomes more. In toxic masculinity, it's not acceptable.
Yeah, it's for lack of a better word, it's gay.
Yes, it's gay.
I mean, that's what I said. It's gay, and I'm like, why? And like men are a lot worse at sharing their feelings with each other than women are. Mm-hmm. And I will tell you, when COVID started, I think men struggled a lot more because I know I'm talking as like a straight woman, okay, but I know like I have lots of friendships that are very intimate that I know if I'm having a rough day, I can call and tell them what I'm feeling and tell them what's going on and the shitty parts of life. And they're going to listen to me. They're going to hear me. They're going to cry with me. Like I think a lot of women have friendships like that. Men tend to have friendships where we watch football games together. Maybe we go golfing together. And that's about as deep as it gets. And so then when COVID started and we couldn't go out and sports were not playing because no one could play sports because it was new, there was nothing for them to talk about.
Oh, wow. I didn't even realize that.
I know that because I had a lot of male clients at the time that were very lonely, very depressed. Women were too, because we were isolated, but I noticed a big difference of like women at least tend to have these connections they can talk to. A lot of men, it was like, well, why would I need to call them? There's really nothing going on. And I'm like, but there's so much going on, like more than sports and activities. So it's just a sign of like.
It's crazy that you said that because literally underneath that it results in higher isolation and loneliness and a lack of social cohesion, which is. Yeah. That makes. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. The pandemic, I could see that. It sure did take away a lot of. Yeah. Yeah, unless like you're a major nerd who is into like networking or something. Like, yeah, you had nothing to talk about.
Right. Seriously, nothing to talk about. So it's kind of goes to show you there's a big difference there.
Okay, so how do we change?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. I will I want to share just a few more things about like healthy masculinity, and then I'll kind of get into how do we create this change, which I think is really hard. Something you said earlier, though, that I wanted to expand on was like a toxic masculine person could dislike women that have masculine traits. I consider assertiveness to be a masculine trait, and assertiveness is different than aggression. Aggression is like scary, intimidating. Assertion is just like, I'm telling you what is happening.
Yes.
And how I feel and what I'm okay with and not okay with. I feel like I am an assertive person, and I have to be in my job too. And I think anyone listening who knows me knows that I'm pretty assertive. But I've had several men really dislike me because of that, because they're kind of viewing me, they kind of just want me to shut up, to be perfectly honest. And it's interesting that I've seen that because the men who really don't like me, I view as more aggressive. And I'm coming to the table as like assertive. They can be aggressive or even passive aggressive. Like they do these things where I'm like, there's this underlying tone of like, you hate me, but you're not saying it, but you're being like rude. You know what I mean? Like there's like this passive aggressiveness. And when I come to the table and I'm assertive, it's almost like a problem, right? Like I'm just kind of addressing it directly. So healthy masculinity, I think, does involve a lot of assertiveness. And when someone doesn't have that healthy masculinity, assertiveness is very threatening to them. They're not going to say that because it would sound weak.
Because they have to be the top dog, right?
Yes.
So that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense.
They have to be the top, like, I'm in power.
Yes.
I feel like assertiveness cuts through that. Yeah. It's like, you're not really in power, though, because I can tell you exactly what's going on.
These are my boundaries, or this is the way I'm going to be treated, or whatever it is. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. So it cuts through on their power, and then they tend to like hate women who are like that, and you'll hear very hateful comments about women who are like that. So when I hear like really hateful comments about strong women, to me I'm like, that sounds like toxic masculinity to me, for someone who's just trying to like, I don't know, be honest. about what they're okay with and not okay with. So I thought that was interesting. But
This is interesting. Okay.
But yeah, healthy masculinity involves the daily practice of engaging in intentional self-growth and commitment to change. And that can be with anything, right? That can be with like your fitness goals. That could be with your mental health. Like those very strong qualities of like, if I want to make a change, I'll make it, kind of thing.
Okay.
I think that's really healthy. Positive or healthy masculinity, it does involve the idea that men can be vulnerable and emotionally expressive and have female friends and express emotions without feeling emasculated, I would say is healthy. And it means not using your size or intimidation to get what you want, and treating others with respect, right, versus demanding it. And then healthy masculinity also involves taking accountability for when you mess up. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but like what I see as far as like accountability with toxic masculinity, because they're not expressing their emotions, if they have hurt someone's feelings, usually what I'll see is like, you're too sensitive, get over it.
Yeah.
Versus, okay, maybe I did hurt your feelings. Maybe I could have said that differently because, I wasn't trying to hurt you.
Yeah.
That to me, that second part of like accountability, that's so masculine to me because I'm like, it takes a lot of confidence and security to be able to go.
It does.
Oh yeah, you're right. That wasn't great. And I should probably do that differently. Versus, you're too sensitive. Get over it. I can't say anything to you because you're just always crying.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. Well, I have heard that men don't say sorry. It's just not something we'd say, right? So
yeah.
I mean, yeah.
For anyone listening, if you are someone that I don't say sorry, someone who's like, I don't ever say sorry. Good luck in your marriage because it's probably not going great. I can tell you now. If you don't ever apologize, your marriage probably sucks.
Oh.
So just that's all I'm gonna say about that. So
Got you.
Because like as a married person, like imagine if you had a rule with Sam, like I'd never apologize. Like, do you think y'all's relationship would be like super great if you were like,
oh no, I apologize all the time. Yeah,
me too. Because sometimes I need to.
Yeah.
So
I fuck up all the time, so that makes sense.
Same.
But now that you're saying that, I am getting. Did you ever watch House of Cards?
I saw like season 1.
Okay, so that first episode, the pilot episode in House of Cards, I think it's the I want to say his name is Frank Underwood is the character's name.
Yes,
but he comes. Yes, because I remember his wife. Claire. I will always remember her because I was just like, oh, what a strong woman. But anyway, I remember him basically coming home and feeling maybe defeated of some sort. I'm not sure, but he told her, "I'm sorry." She got mad at him for it, right? So she was like, "You don't say sorry to anybody." Even me. And I just remember thinking, I'm like, oh, she's pumping up a man. But now that I'm like, oh no, that was toxic ass behavior.
Well, yeah, and you saw how great their marriage was in the show,
yeah,
right? Like, I mean, that was a fucked up relationship. But it even goes to show, like, that patriarchal view, women can fall into that too. I think we've talked about this before, like, when there's this view, like, if women have the view of, like, ew, men don't share emotion. Like, I don't want him to share emotion with me. And then he's like vulnerable and then they get like judgment back. Yeah. I mean, women fall into that too. That's a perfect example of House of Cards is why, like, you don't say sorry even to me. I'm like, who the hell says that?
To be 100% honest, from my experience, women in my life, I feel like I've seen more women be very independent women, and they want to, take away the patriarchy, and they want equal rights, and, we should be treated this way. But those very same women will get the ick if a man is vulnerable, or they'll tell him to man up, or they'll, do these. Again, I've been the type of person who's called a guy pussy. These even things I've done. So it's just it's how you're used to you're told to treat men. It's how you're told to encourage men, which is so interesting, and it goes all the way back to just how we were raised when we were children, right?
It sticks with you. It's really hard. It's really hard work to change it, and that kind of leads me into like, what we what we can do to change this, okay? I have just a few key points, and what I'm going to say, again, it's really hard and sometimes can feel impossible. I mean, there needs to be, first of all, a really big cultural, societal shift. Yes. I mean, God, that's going to, when we pass away, like, that's still going to be, you know, in the works, because I feel like it's just very slow change, but it just needs to be a big societal shift, right? A big perspective shift of, we don't need to bring boys and men into the world in this way, right? There also needs to be really, like, better education. Like, I think some men, well, I shouldn't just say men, women, anybody, don't even know what toxic masculinity is. They hear the term and they're already turned off.
Oh, yeah. Brain shuts off.
Whatever. So it needs to be education, or better access to education. And also better, honestly, a better mental health system. Even with, like, I'm going back to when I talked about, like, men who die by suicide versus, like, how many of them report being depressed. I think some of, like, the depression scales we use in my profession, I think they could be more inclusive, because sometimes, I don't have them pulled up in front of me, but, like, when you go, if you, like, look through the questions of how you're assessing if someone is depressed, men are not reporting that a lot of those things are a problem for them. So it does make me wonder, like, do we need to change the language? Do we need to add more, like, topics or more sections that we're assessing for? Because something that might cause distress for a woman may not cause distress for a man, or they may not think that it does. So there really needs to be further assessment for men to really kind of, like, even identify in themselves, well, maybe I am depressed, right? Because if you look at, like, traditional depression, it's easy for them to kind of shrug it off. Like, that's not me. When I see an angry man, I can pretty much assume that they are depressed. I would say all of them are.
Okay.
Yeah, but they don't associate depression is weak, right?
Yeah, of course. No.
So they're not gonna say that. Two more things. One is learning to be vulnerable, and that learning that vulnerability is not a weakness. Like, I'm talking about emotional vulnerability here. I think it's a skill that a lot of men have to learn. And again, it goes back to being willing to learn it. If someone is digging in their heels and they're like, I'm not changing my ways because nothing I'm doing is wrong, it's going to be really hard for them to want to be vulnerable. But if they're a little bit open to it, or if they do get some education and they start seeing signs in other people, like, that's my last little hint of how to get out of this box, is, like, intervening with other people. Like, if you educate yourself and you're out with your friends, like, you're a man and you're out with your male friends, and one of them does start being disrespectful to a woman at the bar, let's say, intervening and saying, wait a minute.
Yeah, it's not cool, bro.
That wasn't cool.
Okay, yeah.
Like, don't do that.
Okay.
Kind of opens up the door to be like, dang, maybe I shouldn't be doing that either. You know, so those are just and definitely get therapy. That's my other little tip. Get therapy if you can. Okay. And be open to it. Okay. Because I think a good therapist can help, right? Recognizing, like, I'm not here to shame you. I'm just here to help you. Yeah. And that you can feel better. You really can feel a lot better if you get out of this box. So those are my little tips.
I like it.
Hey, anything else?
No, I mean, we pretty much covered, because I had a couple rebuttals, but we pretty much covered it, because, you know, a lot of times people hear toxic masculinity and then just think that the feminist movement is trying to remove masculinity in general, but we pretty much said, no, masculinity should be celebrated, but it's not a box.
Good. All right. Well, hey, everyone, thanks for tuning in and listening. Please like and subscribe and comment. Let us know what else you want to hear, because this was a listener requested topic. We would love to get more of those. We want to give you the topics that you want and the research that you would like to hear. So leave us a comment, message us, email us. Like, we're totally here for that. And again, we are Sex Positivity Unfiltered. And remember to stay curious and fuck politeness.